The sound of a revving engine echoed through the streets as the leather-clad biker made his way down the alley, oblivious to the quiet that had fallen over the small neighborhood. His heavy boots hit the ground with each step as he strutted, the piercing glint in his eyes hidden beneath the dark visor of his helmet. His reputation as a ruthless and unpredictable figure was known throughout the area, and he had a history of getting into trouble. No one dared cross him, but that would change today. At the far end of the alley, an elderly black woman stood patiently, her wrinkled hands gripping the handles of a worn shopping cart. She had been to the corner store, picking up a few things for the evening meal. The sun had begun to dip lower, casting long shadows, and the world seemed to slow down in the fading light. She didn't expect much excitement on this routine trip, just the familiar humdrum of daily life, one day after another. But her life and the life of her family was about to be thrown into chaos by a single, mindless act of violence. The biker, with his haughty swagger and cold demeanor, noticed her standing in his way. He didn't stop or even slow down. In his mind, she was just another insignificant figure in the background of his world. She wasn't worthy of his attention, let alone his respect. Without a second thought, he raised his arm, and with a brutal punch, struck her with all the force his anger could muster. The elderly woman crumpled to the ground, her body falling limp as she lost consciousness. As the biker stood there, breathing heavily and feeling the rush of adrenaline surge through him, he couldn't have known that what he had just done would have far-reaching consequences. He had no idea who the woman was, or more importantly, who her son was. Her son, he was miles away at the time, in the midst of a quiet evening at home, when a call came through that would change everything. The voice on the other end of the line was shaky but clear, telling him what had happened. The old woman was his mother, and she had just been attacked. The shock hit him hard, but it wasn't long before a single, undeniable truth settled into his mind. The man who had harmed her had no idea who he was dealing with. You see, this wasn't just any ordinary mother, and this wasn't just any random biker. Her son wasn't just some average guy with a family and a life to protect. He was an off-duty Navy SEAL, highly trained, capable of taking down anyone who posed a threat. This wasn't going to end the way the biker expected. What followed next would unfold in a way that no one could have predicted. The biker, still basking in the false sense of superiority after his attack, was about to meet someone who would show him just how wrong he was. But the story doesn't end there, and the consequences of this moment would ripple outward, touching more lives than anyone could have imagined. Stay tuned, because the shocking twists and turns are just beginning. As the biker walked away, the last remnants of daylight barely filtering through the alley's narrow passage, he felt a sense of power. It wasn't the first time he had used his fists to assert dominance. His reputation as a troublemaker preceded him wherever he went, and he was used to getting what he wanted by force. People avoided him. People feared him. And as he climbed onto his motorcycle, the engine roaring to life beneath him, he couldn't help but smile at the thought that his day was about to get a lot easier. Little did he know, this was the beginning of a storm he couldn't outrun. Back at the hospital, the elderly woman's condition was critical. She had been knocked unconscious by the force of the blow, and though she had managed to regain some sense of awareness after being rushed into the emergency room, the trauma she suffered left her fragile. Her son, who had only just heard the devastating news, was already in motion. He was a man used to responding quickly, efficiently, with a calm that only years of training and service could provide. The Navy had taught him how to deal with extreme situations, how to think ahead, and how to always be one step ahead of the threat. This wasn't just about protecting his family. This was personal. His mind raced as he made his way to the hospital, his thoughts torn between his mother's well-being and what he knew was coming. He had been trained to fight, but he also understood the deeper implications of violence. The biker's actions were more than just a random act. They were an affront to everything his mother stood for, an assault on someone who had worked her whole life to raise him right. She wasn't just some vulnerable target. She was a woman with decades of wisdom, love, and strength behind her. And the biker's actions couldn't go unchallenged. The man's focus never wavered as he thought about the moment he would face the person who hurt her. His thoughts weren't clouded by rage, but by strategy. He knew what the biker was capable of, and he also knew how dangerous it could be to underestimate someone like himself. This wasn't a fight he could afford to lose. He couldn't allow himself to give in to the instinct to seek revenge without considering the bigger picture. But the biker had no such restraint. With every mile he covered on his motorcycle, he grew more and more convinced that no one could touch him. After all, he was a man who walked through life with no regard for consequences, no thought for the people he trampled over. For him, this was just another day in the life, another incident to add to his list of unchecked transgressions. And as he sped through the streets, the last thing he expected was to be confronted by someone who could bring him to his knees. The biker wasn't the only one unaware of what was coming. His friends, those who followed him, were also caught up in the illusion of invincibility. They were part of his crew, loyal to a fault, and always ready to back him up when things got rough. But they, too, were in for a surprise. They didn't know the kind of man who was after them. They didn't know that the son of the elderly woman they had so carelessly wronged wasn't just anyone. They would soon find out. As the biker pulled up to a local bar later that night, the sound of laughter and music greeted him. It was a familiar scene, one that offered him the sense of control he craved. He entered, his steps confident, scanning the room for his friends. He barely noticed the figure that was watching him from across the room, but he would soon feel the weight of that gaze. Meanwhile, the sun, still in motion, was not far behind. His senses were heightened now, his focus sharpened. The hospital had been a detour, but his mind was now fixed on a single goal: finding the biker and ensuring that his mother's suffering wasn't in vain. His training had prepared him for countless scenarios, but this was personal. The biker might think he could escape the consequences of his actions, but this was the kind of fight that left no room for mistakes. The Navy had taught him how to fight in the face of overwhelming odds, but this time it wasn't just about winning. It was about justice. For a moment, everything hung in the balance. The biker's arrogance still lingered, but so did the undeniable presence of the SEAL. And then it happened. The Navy SEAL delivered a swift blow to the biker's chest, knocking the wind out of him and sending him stumbling backward. The room went silent. The biker collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. His crew, now on their feet, hesitated, unsure if they should rush to his aid or just let it play out. It was clear now that their leader was no longer in control. As the biker struggled to regain his composure, the Navy SEAL didn't flinch. He looked down at him, his expression unwavering. You don't get to hurt innocent people and walk away. Not this time. The words hung in the air like a final warning, the weight of years of training and duty pressing down on the moment. The biker's world had just crumbled around him, and he knew it. His reign of fear was over. The SEAL turned and walked toward the door, leaving the biker and his crew to deal with the aftermath of their own actions. There was no need for any more words. Justice had already been served. The elderly woman, still recovering in the hospital, would now have the chance to heal. Her son had done what he needed to do, not out of anger, but out of a deep sense of responsibility and honor. As the SEAL stepped into the night, the world felt quieter. The biker's crew was left in disarray, their fear palpable as they tried to understand what had just happened. They would never forget the man who had walked in and dismantled their entire sense of power in mere moments. They had underestimated him, and now they had to live with the consequences. Back at the hospital, the elderly woman awoke to find her son by her side. She smiled weakly, relief washing over her. She had always known he would protect her, but now, more than ever, she understood just how much he had sacrificed to ensure her safety. The biker's actions had set off a chain of events, but it was the SEAL's calm, calculated response that had sealed their fate. As the SEAL made his way home, his heart felt a little lighter. The job wasn't done yet. There would always be more battles to fight, more challenges to face. But for tonight, he knew he had made the right choice. Justice had been served, and the price of inaction had been avoided. The story of the biker who dared to cross the wrong person would live on, a reminder that no one, no matter how powerful they thought they were, was ever truly beyond reach. And for everyone who witnessed it, they would remember one simple truth. Never underestimate the strength of someone fighting for what's right. The night would fade, but the message would linger, loud, clear, and impossible to ignore.